This video is about development economics, and the first thing to remember is that development differs to growth. So growth and development are two concepts that are often used interchangeably, but they do differ. So economic growth refers to the increase in total output of goods and services, so GDP, produced by a country or region over time. It typically involves an increase in the quantity and the quality of labour, capital and technology, which then leads to an increase in productivity and output. But economic development, on the other hand, refers to a broader process that involves improvements in people's well-being, including their standard of living, their health, their education, and access to basic services such as clean water and sanitation. So economic development is often measured by indicators such as the HDI, the Human Development Index, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, MPI, and that takes into account not only economic growth, but also social and environmental factors. So, the United Nations definition of development is: development is a multidimensional undertaking to achieve a higher quality of life for all people. So economic development, social development, and environmental protection are interdependent and mutually reinforcing components of sustainable development. So therefore, if you get a question on development, let's say like the following. These are two AQA 25 markers on development. We can see here, Brazil, China, should they pursue protectionist policies to achieve greater economic development and evaluate the views that MNCs play a positive role in the development of LEDCs. Then you cannot treat this question as a question on simply growth. So for example, focusing on GDP or GDP per capita, but you must fully focus on development and what measures development. So your answers should revolve around, for example, the Human Development Index. So let's start on the Human Development Index. Or let's start on looking at what is the difference between a developing and a developed country. So the United Nations have created this list of developed economies ranging from different continents. So we can see in terms of Northern America, we've got Canada and the US, and then we've got Europe, and we've got many of the EU countries. And we've got the G7. So the G7, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, and the US. We've also got the United Nations have also created a list of developing countries. And that involves countries, a lot of countries in, for example, Africa. We've got it in Asia, we've got Latin America. And the big difference between the two is that we can see that the GNI per capita is less than 12,535 for developing countries, and that was in 2021. Whilst if we look at developed countries, it's greater. Also, it mentions HDI. So the HDI is a main measurement of development, and if we consider the categories of development regarding developed and developing, or whether that's lesser or medium, then the HDI for a developed country is often considered to have a high Human Development Index, whilst a developing country has a low HDI. So what do we actually mean by Human Development Index? So this, again, a definition by the UN, is a summary measure of average achievement in key dimensions of human development: a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. So what do they actually mean? So to start with, health and life expectancy at birth. So the health dimension is assessed by life expectancy at birth, and the three highest ranked of the Human Development Index in total are Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland. So let's have a look at the health dimension at birth. What we have is Switzerland at 84 years, we have Norway at 83.2 years, and we have Iceland at 82.7 years. So we can see that those three, I'm not saying that they've got the highest life expectancy, because there might be some other countries that do, but weighted across all three, these three countries come out at top. But 80 in the 80s obviously is very, very high. So therefore, those countries which are more developed will have a higher life expectancy at birth, whilst those countries who are developing at a much slower rate, or they're not developed at all, will have a much lower health or life expectancy at birth. Now, when considering education, there are two factors to consider. There's the mean years of schooling and the expected years of schooling. So again, what we'll do is we'll consider the top 3 ranking countries. So we see again, we've got Switzerland, we've got Norway, we've got Iceland. So with Switzerland, they've got expected years of schooling at 16.5 and the mean years of schooling is 13.9 years. In Norway, it's 18.2 years in terms of expected and the mean years is 13. And we've got Iceland, which is expected at 19.2 years and the mean is 13.8. So we can see actually Iceland are higher than Norway in this, but again, weighted across all 3, they are just below Norway. And then, when we think about this education, those who are lesser developed countries will have a lower expected and mean years of schooling. So for many reasons, lack of provision, perhaps by the government, the inability to afford education, and the requirement of children to join the labour force to support family income. So the final factor that we're going to look at is GNI per capita. So gross national income per capita is a measure of the total economic output of a country, but that includes all goods and services produced by citizens and businesses divided by total population. So it takes into account not only the total value of goods and services produced within a country, but also the income generated by its citizens minus the income earned by foreigners within that country. And that's what makes it different to GDP, but it's quite similar with GDP. So again, if we look at Switzerland, what we've got, and Norway and Iceland, we've got Switzerland at $66,993, and that's being adjusted for purchasing power parity. We've got Norway at $64,660, and remember this is per capita, and we've got $55,782, and that is for Iceland. So again, we'd expect them to be high amounts, and that makes up the Human Development Index. So again, the top 3 countries mentioned above have a HDI closest to 1, which is Switzerland 0.962, Norway 0.961, and Iceland 0.959. However, the Human Development Index can be adjusted for inequality because, as one criticism of HDI is, it doesn't take inequality into account. But the inequality adjusted measurement clearly does. So inequality within a country can significantly affect people's well-being and opportunities. Therefore, there is an inequality-adjusted measure. The Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index is an important extension of this HDI that adjusts the HDI for inequality. So it measures the average level of human development of people in a country while also accounting for inequality in the distribution of health, education, and income. So it gives a more complete picture of a country's level of human development by taking into account the distribution of human capabilities and opportunities. Now, the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, is more reflective of people's actual well-being than the HD alone. But we seem to see the HD rankings more, which is questionable. But by accounting for inequality, it captures the reality that some people may be experiencing low levels of human development despite the country's overall high level of development. So if we look at, and I'm just going to pick out 2 countries, I'm going to pick out 2 countries from these 3. I'm going to pick out Switzerland, I'm going to pick out Iceland. And actually what happens is Switzerland goes down to number 3 if we're talking about inequality, whilst Iceland actually goes up to number 1 and Norway remains the same. So Switzerland dropped to 3rd place, Iceland would go top, Norway would remain 2nd, and some of the other countries in the list of HDI, a prime example, South Africa, is recorded as having the biggest negative difference, 22 places lower when considering inequality. Now, there's also other measurements of development, and that includes the multi-dimensional poverty index. Now, this is a measure of poverty which takes into account several dimensions, including health, education, standard of living, and it's created by the United Nations Development Programme in collaboration with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. It used 10 indicators to measure poverty across 3 dimensions, and they are weighted equally, and a person is considered multi-dimensionally poor if they are deprived in at least 1/3 of the indicators. So that's, for example, if you're thinking about health, it could be nutrition. Are they underweight for their age? Is it to do with child mortality? With education, is it to the years of schooling? Could it be to do with school attendance? If you think about living standards, think about cooking fuel, example, deprivation regarding household cooking, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, housing, and maybe their assets. We've also got the genuine progress indicator, and this is a metric measuring economic, social, and environmental well-being of a society, taking into account factors that are often ignored by traditional economic indicators such as GDP. So the GPI takes into account a wide range of factors that affect people's well-being, and that includes such income distribution, household debt, value of unpaid work. It could be to do with social factors such as crime and pollution, the value of education and volunteer work. It could be to do with environmental factors, for example, the depletion of natural resources, the cost of climate change. And the GPI takes into account the cost of economic growth. So not the benefits of economic growth, but actually the cost which could be associated with economic growth. And then the final one that we're going to look at is the Human Poverty Index. Now, this is a composite index that measures poverty in developing countries, focused on the extent to which people are deprived in the areas of basic human needs, such as education, health, and again, living standards. So there is that theme across all of these to do with those three. So when you get a question on 25 marker, obviously it means that it's really important to consider the educational needs, the health, and the living standards of that country. So it's developed by the United Nations Developmental Programme as an alternative to traditional income-based measures of poverty. So it consists three of the following. Number one, percentage of people expected to die before they're 40. 2, adult literacy rate. And 3, percentage of people without access to basic needs. Now, the Human Poverty Index is calculated by combining these three components into a single index, which is ranked on a scale of 0 to 100. 100 means extreme poverty, and 0 means no poverty at all.